declarations.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Apologies from Councillor Birdsall and Councillor Bushman.
Right, thank you very much.
Apologies,
Do we have...
Madam Mayor. Apologies also from Councillor Murray.
Right, thank you. Any others? Right, could we have declarations of interest, please? There are none. We now come to item 3, the local plan part 2. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This meeting has been called because there's an urgency to bring our draft local development plan to a conclusion and make it operational as part of our local planning process to 2028. I won't go through the 283 pages of the report in detail, as there has been extensive consultation. Rather, I'd like to highlight why we need a local development plan and the key issues. Housing has become increasingly difficult for many people as the number of new homes has not kept pace with our growing population and years of undersupply, and this is recognised by all the main political parties. Rushcliffe is a popular place to live, but demand for housing outstrips supply, and we have to respond to government pressure to deliver more housing. In fact, we delivered 760 new homes last year, more than any other district or borough in Nottinghamshire. Our vision is to ensure that all Rushcliffe residents have a choice of good quality, energy efficient homes in the right sustainable locations that they can afford. We work with neighbouring councils, and we were disappointed when the government allocated us a minimum of 13,150 homes to be built by 2028, rather than our preferred target of 9,000. This is not negotiable, and we need an adopted local development plan to ensure that we have quality housing and jobs in the right locations. This can be controversial, but by adopting our core strategy in 2014, we, if you like, set our course. And 5 years later, this part 2 of the land and planning policies now needs to be approved. Our homes allocation was incorporated into our core strategy. However, we don't actually build homes, we just give the planning approvals. And although a good start has been made, some of our strategic sites are taking time to get moving. And as a whole, they are now unlikely to deliver their numbers by 2028. So the Part 2 proposes an additional 25 small to medium housing sites that should be quicker to deliver to make up the shortfall with the strategic sites. Now, it's never easy to decide where the new housing should be located, particularly where this involves greenfield or greenbelt sites. Over 40% of Rushcliffe is greenbelt, but we have very few brownfield sites. With our core strategy, the inspector said there was convincing evidence that our housing allocation could not be delivered without removing land from the greenbelt, and found there were exceptional circumstances to alter its boundaries. This has established the context, if you like, for the release of greenbelt for development in Part 2. Not everyone, however, agrees with the proposed sites. Rarely do any planning proposals get a unanimous support. There are many individuals and organisations that do not accept the need for more houses. But to do nothing is not an option. If we don't deliver our housing target, then the government have threatened they will determine where they are built. Surely we need to be pragmatic and, with our local knowledge, decide where this housing goes. The inspector concluded that the local plan Part 2 is legally compliant, sound, and can be adopted, provided the main modifications are incorporated in full, and these are set out in 4.8 on page 4 of the report. The Council cannot legally make any further material modifications, nor can it seek to delete any of the inspector's recommended main modifications and then still adopt the plan. We have a binary choice, to adopt or not to adopt. Oh, I'll miss out the Shakespeare bit. The inspector's report has been considered by our local development framework group, and they have recommended adoption. Not to adopt would leave us without a complete and up-to-date set of local planning policies. But more importantly, with the National Planning Policy Framework having a presumption in favour of sustainable development, not to adopt would considerably restrict the Council's ability to resist unwanted speculative development, a situation we are all too familiar with. We need a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites, and currently we have about 3.4 years. Hence the unwanted developments that neither we nor the local communities want. The Inspector's final report is in Appendix 2. It states that the Council has engaged with the stakeholders, met the duty to cooperate, followed our statement of community involvement, and undertaken a sustainability appraisal. It states that subject to the recommended main modifications, all the individual policies of the plan are clear, justified and consistent with national policy, and that they will be effective, and that the release of the Greenbelt is justified in principle and where necessary, exceptional circumstances have been demonstrated. This Council has a statutory duty to produce a local plan. In Rushcliffe, this will comprise the Local Plan Part 1, the core strategy, which was adopted in December 2014, and the Local Plan Part 2, Land and Planning Policies, which is the subject of this report this evening. We now have to decide whether to adopt Part 2, and if we do, we will have a complete local development plan. Finally, Madam Mayor, I want to thank Dave Mitchell, Richard Mapletoft, Phil Marshall, Andrew Pegger and all the planning team, many of whom behind me, who have spent many years in preparing this local development plan. And I ask all councillors to support the recommendation in item 2 on page 1 of the report. Namely, it is recommended that Council adopts the Local Plan Part 2, Land and Planning Policies incorporating the main modifications recommended by the Inspector to make the plan sound and legally compliant. B, deletes the saved policies ENV 15, H1, E1, E7 and E8 of the 1996 Rushcliffe Local Plan. C, approves the Local Plan Policies map, including the amendments as a consequence of adopting the Local Plan Part 2 and the deletion of the saved policies ENV 15, H1, E1, E7 and E8 of the 1996 Rushcliffe Local Plan. And finally, D, delegates authority to the Executive Manager Communities in consultation with the Cabinet Portfolio for Housing to make any necessary final minor textual, graphical and presentational changes required to the Local Plan Part 2 and the adopted Local Plan Policies map. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm very happy to second the proposal and I'll reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Councillor Upton, for your briefing on this not-so-brief document. Being a new group of councillors, as I may have mentioned before, digesting the wealth of information, detail and importance of this document has been a challenge that we've all enjoyed. We're thankful for your help and input. From all parties, council officers, has really helped us to get up to speed with the Local Plan Part 2 and other planning issues. We understand the importance of this document and how securing a 5-year supply of land will help safeguard Rushcliffe from unchecked development as long as we remain on target. We understand there is some considerable redundancy built in case of slippage to ensure that local planning decisions stand up against appeal. Sadly, slippage on previous plans left some of our villages liable to large and unplanned growth, which will cause some growing pains for years to come. Services and infrastructure struggle to catch up. I'll leave this point to the affected villages' councillors to comment further. I look forward to seeing how closely to reality this plan follows. As we know, no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. Of course, the enemy in this case is a little confusing as there are so many stakeholders in the planning process. We all want places where our families can grow, and nobody wants to build on Greenbelt land. It's interesting to see how other councils are taking control of their process. No doubt colleagues will have seen today Norwich City Council's award-winning properties making the news building affordable, warm and sunlight-filled housing for their communities. We understand that the recommendations made by the inspector need to be taken in full, and the document as it stands cannot be further amended before adoption. Further points we make are for comment and consideration for future planning matters. We look forward to taking a greater part in planning the formulation of the update to the core strategy. Our councillors will vote freely on this recommendation, and we look forward to hearing the comments and representations of as many councillors as possible on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In 2014, Liberal Democrats opposed Part 1 for two reasons. On Sharp Hill, we objected to the increased number of dwellings and the anticipated cramming of 3, 4 and 5 bedroomed houses with no regard to providing starter homes and with no decent community facilities, all of which have currently turned out to be the case. Secondly, we wanted to voice an objection to the scale of increase which had been demanded and imposed by the planning processes and the inspectorate on Rushcliffe. In 2011, we had 47,349 dwellings. By 2028, we were and are expected to expand by another 13,150. This is a 28% increase. In practical terms, it was evident that the so-called strategic sites were unlikely to be built so quickly. Rushcliffe has had to become overgrown too fast, and in the time until this Part 2, Eastleigh has paid a particularly high price. Reluctantly, we have to live with the demand for the over 13,000 dwellings, and we will be voting in favour of Part 2 of the plan for that reason, and also for the reason as expressed in the report that the failure to adopt it will expose us to even more unwanted speculative building. We particularly welcome that the plan does not allocate any further sites at Bingham and Eastleigh other than those already approved. Inevitably, the allocations at the key settlements and those at the other villages will be unwelcome to some, in particular in Ruddington, where extensive building had been approved prior to the planned period. We are pleased to see that the policy that renewable energy technologies will be encouraged, although I don't know how that encouragement will occur. This highlights the failure of the government to introduce the stalled building regulations which required even more from developers. We welcome the clarity of Policy 25 on retail centres in Bingham, West Bridgford and the 6 local centres, and of Policy 26 on centres of neighbourhood significance. We welcome many of the policies about recreational open spaces, green spaces and protecting nature conservation sites. We welcome the requirement for net gains in tree planting and many of the other wider policies. We are uneasy about the policies on flood protection. We are not convinced it anticipates consequences of climate change as a result both of rising sea levels and increasing number of deluges, and therefore on flooding, and we're not sure that some of our properties are going to be totally future-proof. The core strategy, as described on page 84, describes excellent transport systems and reducing the need to travel. Apart from the changes, some still awaited on the A52 junctions and the possible extension of the tram beyond into the estate beyond Clifton, there are no other measures to reflect the 28% increase in people in the borough. The issue of park and rides will have to be grasped in the next stage revision of the core strategy, Part 1. We note that Radcliffe, with 920 proposed dwellings, is planned to have another primary school and a medical centre. This apart, it is our view that planning for schools, especially secondary schools, and for primary health care is totally inadequate to accommodate the overall growth across Rushcliffe. we ask that the Cabinet and officers seek clarification from the relevant authorities on improvements to those public services and be able to report to Council on the plans for provision to match the 28% increase in dwellings and consequently people. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, yes, I think members are right. This has been a really long time coming. Members and officers especially have been working on this for a very, very long time. No local plan is going to be perfect. And that is, although we'll be looking to adopt this part 2 tonight, it is part of an ongoing process. We feed into this, we look to revise it in the future, and we look for updates. In particular, we look for further powers from central government that will allow us to achieve the kind of things that we need for the people in this borough and indeed in other authorities across the country as well. We need far more powers in place to combat climate change and to make sure that we're building houses that are fit for the future. Ones that have photovoltaic panels on the roof from the start. Ones that have sustainable drainage systems around them. Ones that can deal with the issues of flooding, not just on site, but caused and around the site. We need to be able to deal with these things, and we need to be able to deal with them now. And it's not enough for us just to sit on our hands and wait for central government to pull its finger out and do it. There are people, not just in this country, but all around the world, participating in Extinction Rebellion events over this week, and they will continue to do so over the years until governments worldwide adequately address this problem. We are way past the stage of needing to go cap in hand and like supplicants to developers. We need to have the point now where governments actually take a hand and directly participate in building housing, sustainable housing for the future. There is much to be said about biodiversity on the sites that we're looking at. It is terrible that sites have been taken out of greenfield sites, but if you look at some of the sites that have been built up elsewhere within the borough already, Cotgrave, for example, the biodiversity on the Cotgrave pit site, although it was an old industrial site, was actually higher than some of the surrounding fields, which are sort of sprayed with chemicals and effectively a monoculture. We need to protect our environment and the animals within it, as well as caring for our citizens. Transport has been mentioned. We have a long way to go on improving transport for people within the borough. As many councillors know, the bus services are few and far between in some of the outlying villages. The bus services that we do have, although they are fast, are often mired in transport in traffic jams. We need to look at much better bus systems, and we need to look at tram systems expanding out from the Nottingham area, and tram train systems as well, systems that can run into town and city centres and make better use of the rail network that we have. Councillors may not be aware that much of the work that's being looked at by Midlands Connect to deal with improving transport across the East and West Midlands doesn't actually look at improvements that will be coming, improvements that will be coming in place in the year, say, 2040, post HS2, which is already delayed, if it's built at all, because I would still put no more than 50-50 on the chances of it coming across to the East Midlands, whatever happens in the West. Local services, where they are built in new communities, need to be built at the heart of those communities, at the centre of those communities. Already on a couple of sites we've seen it where what was meant to be a village centre or a town centre or a new district centre gets pushed to the edge or developed much, much later on. And so that people are left with no choice but to drive their kids to the schools. Schools, shops, other facilities need to be at the centre of any new developments, where they are within easy walking distance for people to get to them in good time and easily. Councillors, there is much in here that I could go into in considerable depth, particularly on the sustainable energy, but I think we might be here quite a while, so I probably won't. Suffice to say, there is an awful lot that needs to be done for wind energy, solar power, biofuels, ground source heat pumps. We also need to take account of the fact that we have the Melton and Rushcliffe Landscape Sensitivity Study that came in 2014, which really does push against a lot of wind turbines being built. And okay, I know that they're a very contentious issue, but they do have to be part of the energy mix in the future, and that particular document is something that is going to have to be revised if we need to get wind turbines in place to generate the power that we need for the future. Councillors, the Green Group will be supporting this document. We have grave reservations about it, but we recognise that for the people of a borough, we need to do the work now, we need to get the housing built now, and we need to make a start on building truly sustainable society and sustainable communities for our future. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The independent councillors will be voting to adopt Local Plan Part 2. It has been a long time in the preparation, and we thank the officers concerned for the complex and painstaking work that's gone into this. In the long years without it, Rushcliffe has lost control of its planning decisions. As you all know, this is having a severe impact on Eastleek, which is being targeted relentlessly by developers. But it's not just Eastleek. Other areas outside the green belt, such as Aslopton, are subject to the same pressures. And green belt sites are not safe either. They're also in danger of being granted at appeal, as happened with the Asher Lane site in Runnington. It's imperative that Local Plan Part 2 is adopted today, so that this council can regain control to operate as the planning authority for Rushcliffe. We need our planning to be plan-led, not developer-led. Is Local Plan Part 2 the best it could be? No. There are several important policy matters, including climate change, that need to be picked up in the review of the core strategy, which is already underway. Dialogue is needed in the early stages of this process to ensure that members are able to influence the direction of travel of this review. There's also a pressing need to ensure that the strategic sites move forward so that the 5-year housing land supply is maintained. There needs to be a continued focus on the Clifton site, but there is at least some progress now being made there. The biggest threat to the 5-year housing land supply is the Gamston-Tollerton site, which has stalled, seemingly because Rushcliffe and Nottinghamshire County Councils are pulling in different directions. Many of you are county councillors as well as Rushcliffe councillors. Why are you allowing this stalemate to continue to the detriment of the Rushcliffe residents you represent? Further sites adjacent to the urban edge need to be allocated. Some came forward from developers during Local Plan Part 2 process, and they need to be looked at again. Building on the site removed from the Greenbelt in the core strategy and safeguarded for future development also now needs to be considered. There's no opportunity today to further modify Local Plan Part 2. That would take years. So let's get it signed off. But we can't then just heave a sigh of relief and forget about planning policies and the housing land supply. There's just too much at stake for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could I just formally request a recorded vote, please, on
Yes,
this
certainly.
at the end as we move forward? I'd just like to make a couple of points. First of all, I'd just like to reflect Councillor Upton and thank the officers for the incredible amount of work that's gone on there.
Yes.
We know how difficult this has been. It's not just creating this plan, it's also supporting the planning process as we go along. I'd also just like to recognise and thank the members of the LDF as well, of course, who've met over many years, who've also contributed greatly to this plan. Now, there are very few things that tie all our wards together, and one of the biggest things is obviously planning. And I'm delighted as opposition parties that you've recognised this, that it is absolutely essential we get this plan through. Quite rightly, since 2014, we've been working very, very hard to make sure that we are delivering these sites. We've talked about some of the strategic sites. I'd just like to pick up Councillor Thomas, that actually you're the major landowner at Gamston, is actually the City Council we've had the problems with as well. So it's probably just unfair just to highlight the County Council, but they are very difficult, and that's the advantage of this Local Plan 2. These are smaller sites, much more deliverable, much more in control, and we can get these actually going faster. But let's please recognise those strategic sites are now starting to move well. I'll look at Ed Walton, certainly Sharp Hill. We mentioned about Clifton now is taking huge strides forward, And of course, we've seen with Bingham and also with Cotgrave has gone very well. And I'm very hopeful over the next 12 months that we will see a huge amount of progress. I'd just like to also pick up with Rod, actually, who talked about health and education. I absolutely share your concerns as well. I just want to assure members is that we have very strong dialogue with all the authorities concerned there. It is very difficult because every district in the county is badgering them that we need schools, we need the health, etc. Of course, it is then very reliant on funding, but timing is very important. And I absolutely agree, particularly we've seen at Sharp Hill, for instance, where we've been trying to get that school underway very quickly, particularly there at, I know at Radcliffe, a very key issue is going to be out the medical side there as well. But I can absolutely assure all members is that we are working both as a cabinet and as officers with all these authorities to make sure they are delivering the infrastructure to support our communities. And there is nothing more important at the moment in terms of doing that. And lastly, as we talked about this plan, and we talked about a lot of the environmental things, particularly as Councillor Mallender talked about, let's just remember we haven't just been sitting there waiting for this plan to be approved. For years and years, through our scrutiny groups, we have been leading Nottinghamshire in terms of the environmental policies, not just about planning, but for everything we do as an authority. And I'm very proud on that because it is very challenging and we are making huge strides. We have been petitioning the government, particularly for some time, that we need the government to step up to put these standards with house building. I absolutely, totally agree. So I think that will make the biggest difference. But we're not just sitting there waiting for the government. We are leading the way with developers. We've got forums. We talk about Abbey Road, for instance, where we are going to make that an absolute prime example of how houses should actually be built. And I welcome every members in terms of their contribution to looking at that. But I do stress, particularly opposition members, you have a very big say in scrutiny. You'll see a lot of these policies all go through the new scrutiny mechanism for your say to influence as we go forward and making sure that this plan is reviewed, making sure it's delivering what it's actually set out to do. But lastly, Madam Mayor, I would like to thank that support. I think everybody appreciates in the room how important it is that we get on and we deliver these houses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Butler.
Oh, well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I think it's all pretty much been said. It's been a very long process for the last more than 5 years, but leading up to part 2 from part 1 has been 5 years. And as colleagues have said, development is inevitable. It's going to happen in Rushcliffe, whether we like it or not. And far better for us to be in control of that so we can have a say where the development is going to be, but also crucially, as has been pointed out, the importance of the support, the infrastructure, and so on. We're here to do a difficult job, and whenever you have any planning site, anything to do with planning, there will be some people who will inevitably be disappointed, and others who won't be. That's life, but I think that between us, the officers, the members across party, the LDF group, have worked so very hard to try and make the most of what is a very difficult job. As I say, whatever happens in the world of national politics, whichever government comes in the future years, we will be expected to be building lots of houses in Rushcliffe because it's a popular place to be. And without this local plan, it will be very difficult to reduce the number of houses that are built. And finally, on the green side of things, I'll being slightly parochial for a moment, the recent developments in Cotgrave sold out before it was all completed, but also, even more importantly, is the fact that it's won various awards for the type of house building, the energy efficiency, but also the leisure and green aspects that were being brought in to serve the people who are living there. And I know that, as everyone will have read in these multitude of pages, that we will expect similar sort of support and contributions from the developers, and also good positive working with the various agencies and partners we work with. So I'm very encouraged to hear the comments we've heard tonight. It has been a long journey, and there's still a long way to go. As has been said, this isn't the end of the matter. It's a never-ending process, but this is so very, very important. And anyone who may still be wavering as to how to vote tonight, I really would ask you to remember that if you don't support this, Rushcliffe would be in a difficult place. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's our duty to control development in our borough. This plan is an important tool in achieving that, and I'll be supporting it this evening. The risks inherently involved with losing control of the development process are too great to accept. Failing to evidence an adequate supply of housing in the borough, which would be the inevitable consequence of failing to adopt this plan, would be a failure to each and every one of our residents. Whilst being fully appreciative that the plan covers the entire borough, I make absolutely no apology for making an admittedly niche point regarding an impact in the Goton ward, since it is the people of that community who sent me here to represent them first and foremost. In redrawing the greenbelt boundaries around Goton and in setting it, an area of land to the south of Pygwell Avenue has been removed from the greenbelt without being allocated for housing. This is referred to at paragraph 62 of the inspector's report, where he concludes that this, quote, may give rise to further housing development in the village. This isn't acceptable, and given the knowledge that the owners of this site have promoted it for housing development, it should have either remained greenbelt land or been proposed for allocation within the plan. Leaving it in limbo between the two smacks of allowing the prospect of development via the back door. It creates avoidable risk to a process on which we should be exercising full control. The Goton Neighbourhood Plan, which came before this council at its last meeting, seeks to designate this land as a local green space. Thus, the landscape quality and community value will be protected, subject to a positive referendum result. And it is on this basis, and as a result of the dedicated hard work of the Goton Neighbourhood Plan Group in securing the local green space designation for this land, that I am in a position to support the plan this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Gord.
Hi, Madam Mayor. I've got quite a few things I've got to say, unfortunately, regarding this local plan. What's slightly worrying me is we received this inspector's report on the 20th September this year, and I'll be going through it, obviously, because that's what we're meant to be doing, and found quite a few things that are alarming about it. Alarming because there's quite a few mistakes in it, and I think for us as a borough to just accept wholeheartedly what's been published in here without any kind of debate or discussion about what we feel about it is undemocratic and a little bit dangerous. My first point, obviously it says it's sound. Well, I turn to my first point here about Ruddington and numbers and the amendments that have been asked to be put for Ruddington. It's page 57 of the whole document, it's page 10 of the modifications. It states quite clearly that the core strategy set a target of a minimum of 250 homes, well, that's not new, we know that need to be built on greenfield sites at Ruddington up to 2028. It's considered that Ruddington has a scope to sustain around 350 dwellings. Scope to sustain to me means it should be just about able to cope with. That's why when someone says I've got scope to sustain what I'm doing at work right now, it means I'm very busy, but I could just about hang in there. They've crossed out the number 350 and they've just amended it to 525. That's remarkable that you could just do that, right? Then, if you look at Eastleigh, we know that they've done the same. They've taken the word 1,000 out, they put 1,200. The target was originally 400. It then goes on to say it's already exceeded that, so it's met its minimum target. Well, I'm sure Eastleigh's very happy that it's met its minimum target of 400 out of the 1,200 it's having. Like, these are worrying numbers that have just been crossed out and put in. I find that quite alarming. That's the first point that I need to make. The second point is more parochial and local to Ruddington is the Wilford Road estate that's currently put in there as one of the 4 places that are being built on. Now tonight, as we drove past there to get to this meeting, that land is currently got water logging all over it. It's in the floodplain, right? There's a mistake in here about it that says the boundaries, this is on page 34, it says the council has the boundaries of the site are with the Packman Dyke to the north, which is correct, there's Ruddington residents in here who will say that, and the A60 to the east. The A60 is a major trunk road that links Loughborough with Nottingham. That's not running by the site. This is an alarming mistake because that would assume that the planning inspector believes that there is adequate access into Nottingham from that site. There is not. It's a country lane past the golf club. This is a glaring oversight that we're going to adopt without any scrutiny because we're accepting this straight off because we've got to do it tonight, yes or no. Now, I understand the importance of the local plan and there's lots of work gone into it. I totally understand that, years and years. But we have to be holding people to account for this. We'll go back to our residents and explain why we voted this through. It then goes on to say, quite clearly, about the same site in Wilford Road. This is in the floodplain. Well, it does say quite clearly, where is it on here? I've written it down. Some of it is floodplain level 1, right? That's the 1 in 1,000 year flood, very extreme. Most of it, or substantial amount of it, is in floodplain zone 2, right? That means the 1 to 100 year flood. Now that can happen more frequently now with climate change. I was driving here to the meeting, listening to the radio, and they were saying that climate change will mean that these flood levels are going to be more frequent, right? So we're going. This is not sustainable at that point. Then there's also a small part of it, which is the 1 in 20 chance of flooding. Now I know there's substantial mitigation going into that, but that's insane. Okay, and then it goes on to say, page 124, that there is no alternative to Wolford Road being in there. Well, there is. You could take it out of there. That would return Ruddington down to just around 400 homes, which was the initial amount that was considered sustainable by the local plan before the inspectors took it up to 525. So what we're saying is, I cannot vote for this as a representative of my community because it's wholly unfair. It's not fair on Ruddington. So I could sit there if I was the East League candidate and say the same thing. I understand that we've got to try and stand up for our communities and accept this local plan. But to do it without any scrutiny of it and to look through what it means is quite dangerous and bypasses democracy, really. We need to look at this, removing one time to pause. I've written it down here, a bit of a joke, because I thought it was very funny. It says, a deal is better than no deal, apparently. But a bad deal is a bad deal. I recommend that we seek a short extension while some discussions can occur around the inspector's report. I'm not asking us to throw it out. I'm asking us to spend some time looking at it as a borough, looking at these issues that are in that amendments and saying, look, okay, we accept what you said there, but we don't accept that. That's how these things should be carried out, isn't it? It's part of a planning situation, not us just rubber stamping it because we've got no choice and it's accepting some terrible things for our villagers. Nothing's been done to consider whether Ruddington, the 3,000 homes are fair.
Councillor Gaunt, you are running out of time.
Thank you.
Please.
I thought it'd take all my time. Thank you.
Right.
Cheers.
You did very well. Thank you very much. Councillor Cotty.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are parts of the local plan affecting the Keyworth area which bring issues to the community. And I'm speaking on behalf of Councillor Inglis and Edavine as well tonight. We all agree, the three of us, on the things that I'm briefly going to say. Right. And we didn't want three of us standing up saying the same things. So the Keyworth, I'm going to start with the Keyworth neighbourhood plan because that started back in 2011. We were one of the first councils. And the local parish council put forward parish council group. The chair of that was Councillor Linda Abbey, who was a borough councillor and a parish councillor, yeah. And I was invited on. And working with the planning team, in particular Richard Mapletoft and the team, we put together our local plan and took guidance from support as well. We met developers, went through all the sites, consultation process, the whole work, and we got to 2015 having spent many hours on it. And we had the parish elections, and for the first time in our village for many, many years, we had a political party. Everybody stood as independents before. The Labour Party put forward about 12 people, of which some got on, of course, and that's fine. We don't have a problem with that, but this will come back at the end of the next piece I'm going to say. The neighbourhood plan was well supported by the community, and over 80% of the population of Keyworth that voted, which was a high turnout, supported the neighbourhood plan. So we adopted that at the referendum, and it was despite, and I use the word scurrilous, campaign by the local political party, which was on the parish council at that time. And it went through the parish council, but when the referendum came to the community, there was a party political leaflet put out telling our community not to vote for it. So we ended up, we had to put what was a neutral leaflet out actually to explain the pros and cons of it. And I say it did actually go through. But some of the people of Keyworth were a bit sceptical about the fact that when the local plan part 2 then came forward, some of the neighbourhood plan or a site appeared in that wasn't put forward by the neighbourhood plan or voted on. Myself and my colleagues the parish council, various residents have written to the inspector when required and objected to one site being put in. The inspector's reports come back and it is what it is. It doesn't really change anything. The conclusion in Keyworth is that we've got 4 sites now instead of 3. They're all in the green belt.
Yes.
Keyworth has been fortunate not to get housing because of the green belt. And instead of 450 houses, we're going to get 650. And the community do want the houses. We've not had any development in the village. It will help. It'll help the businesses. The school numbers are struggling, which they won't do now. So it does bring, those houses will bring in benefits for the community. And I accept that, and we've heard already, that 1 or 2 other communities have suffered the same sort of things as Keyworth have had. So we appreciate that the planning appeals have gone for other villages where the green belt has played a part, but the 5-year land supply has meant that those villages have had things thrust upon them which they weren't expecting or didn't want within the borough. So we actually accept that those communities actually need protecting. So my colleagues and myself accept this plan is for all of Rushcliffe and it's not just for Keyworth. So with that, we'll be supporting the adoption and intend to object at the planning side of it if planning goes against the wishes of the community, and we'll be supporting our neighbourhood plan for our community. Finally, I would like to say a personal thank you to Richard Mapletoft, who, him and his team, helped us immensely with the neighbourhood plan and advised us through what we've been doing, and all the other officers involved in the process. You might be able to sleep well tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to comment on 1 or 2 of other people's contributions. Councillor Gaunt's contribution, and if I continue his analogy, no extension, no ifs, no buts, we're adopting on the 8th of October. We need this, Madam Mayor. Without it, as Councillor Gaunt was suggesting that we need to debate it further, we would leave ourselves more vulnerable without that control. Whether the numbers are right for him, if we didn't adopt this, there is a danger he could land with more numbers. That is why we need to adopt this now, tonight. There have been long debates over many years. I realise Councillor Gaunt hasn't been party to all of them, but this has been going on for a long, long time. When we tried to adopt the first one back in 2006.
Yes.
So it's a long time ago, Madam Mayor. The scope to sustain, we'd started talking about the lower numbers, but as I say, if we don't adopt this, Eastleigh would still be vulnerable to yet further attack. So we must adopt this. Transport infrastructure, bioenergy, ground source heat pumps, etc. Councillor Mallender mentioned those, and Councillor Robinson talked about Abbey Road and the Cabinet's ambition to have a real showcase site, and so that will be a complete innovative forerunner to ensure that we are setting a good example for other developers to follow. Councillor Thomas talked about signing off but continuing the work. That's quite correct, Madam Mayor, because Richard Mapletoft, I know he's grown a lot older during the years that he's been working on it, but he can't retire. He can maybe have one night's good sleep, as Councillor Cotty said, but he can't retire because it's like the Forth Rail Bridge painting.
Yes.
It starts all over again tomorrow morning after your good sleep. Councillor Jones mentioned schools, health, etc. I'd just like to give him a little bit of crumb of comfort, because only this afternoon I chaired a meeting in the County Council talking about the schools provision in the light of additional development in Rushcliffe. So it is being addressed. So some comfort there. I'm not saying there's an easy answer, I'm just saying it is being addressed. And on that note, with schools, health, etc., that's just all part of infrastructure, including transport. And I view this document, Madam Mayor, as a platform for campaigning, whether it's with the government, with developers, but campaigning to put infrastructure provision first at the start of developments, rather than waiting for the 200th, 400th, 600th house to be built. So once we've got this adopted, we can then use this to show evidence we've got these challenges, we've got this pressure, we need to get the infrastructure in place as well. So we all need to be supporting this, and we all need to be voting for it, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. You said Councillor Brennan.
Councillor Brennan, then.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Firstly, can I add my congratulations to Councillor Upton, councillor colleagues and officers for finally bringing this plan to fruition. I believe if it started 7 years ago, it must feel like a life's work for some of the people involved in it. It does beg a belief that it can take 7 years to produce a plan for a borough the size of Rushcliffe. And that calls into question some of the discussion about perhaps thinking about still streamlining the planning process so that it doesn't take 7 years for us to be able to take ownership of our local planning processes. I welcome the plan. I'll be supporting the plan. It demonstrates a necessary supply of housing land and should help to protect us from the speculative development that we've talked about and many villages have experienced. I'd also particularly like to welcome the emphasis in the plan on vibrant local community centres, high streets, and the attempt to seek a balance of commercial use on our high streets and village centres to ensure that residents have a range of services and retail opportunities that they can access in their local communities so that they remain with an economic and vibrant heart in each of the major settlements. I just want to briefly mention Radcliffe-on-Trent, if I may, as that's why I'm here. I do note that the inspector states, there is no substantive evidence that the overall level of new homes cannot be adequately accommodated by the current road infrastructure in Radcliffe-on-Trent and around Radcliffe-on-Trent. As a resident of Radcliffe-on-Trent, I do find that surprising, that observation. And as ward councillors, we will continue to monitor impacts on the road infrastructure, and it reflects Councillor Clark's comments about having that infrastructure planning in advance of development and not alongside or worse after the event. So we will continue to monitor the impacts on the roads around and within Radcliffe-on-Trent and the traffic levels, and we will monitor those as they're brought forward at the planning application stage. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd firstly like to echo colleagues' statements about traffic. As the East Bridgeford ward member, we are with Newton and the Newton development. East Bridgeford is within this plan. There's lots of concerns about traffic, Gunthorpe Bridge and around there, and that coupled with the development in Radcliffe is going to have a significant effect on transport within the area. So, and it's already problematic down to Gunthorpe Bridge. So we really need to, if it's going to be sustainable, pressure needs to be put onto the relevant authorities to actually stop putting the head in the sand over this and to try and sort it out the best way it can. Because with that amount of development and the Bingham development, it is huge for that road. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
I'd just like to return to the point of the 28% increase in pressure. And it's interesting to hear that there have been discussions in the County Council about the provision of schools. I think it's important to stress that there is a current shortage of secondary schools places in the West Bridgeford area. People moving into this area are being told that they will have to go way further out into the borough, which is adding to pressure of driving, people being driven around backwards and forwards. That particularly applies in Ed Walton on the Sharp Hill development, but I'm sure it's happening elsewhere as people move in with children. The same pressure applies on the GP services, and I just don't think it's good enough for this to be in the long-term future. This needs immediate action on behalf of the relevant authorities.
Thank you,
Chair.
I think I've got the way through absolutely everybody. Councillor Upton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite a lot of issues raised there, and quite a large and detailed report, as we know. I don't propose to pick up every point that every councillor's made, because some of them have already been addressed and they've had answers. I'd rather concentrate on the sort of holistic, strategic issues than the detail. But what I would like to just clarify, if I may, because it is a large and complicated report, the actual final document is Appendix 2. And you have an Appendix 1 after the report that leads you through the inspector's report and how he viewed it and his public examination, quite detailed thoughts that he put about the original draft from this council and his suggestions that if we made his main modifications, then it would be sound and legal and we were okay to adopt it. And after that Appendix 1, there is what I call the main modifications, and that's where the striking out of the text is and the new text, where he did that for us. He was asked to, and that was his suggestions, that if we did that, without repeating myself too much, then we would have a sound plan. So Appendix 2 is the sound and legal plan. And as I say, if you look at that, when you, and I don't want to pick up particular points too much, but that's where the issues about the number of homes, for instance, at Ruddington and elsewhere, are not at the minimum numbers originally quoted, but where after his examination and consultation with the stakeholders and developers and everybody else, where we have arrived at, because he says quite clearly, the report states that the key settlements have sufficient infrastructure, and that includes roads, services and facilities to support the proposed allocations, and that's on item 30, I think, on page 17, and it crops up across the report and in Appendix 2. A lot of these details about the housing capacities for each site and the traffic issues will be covered at the planning committee stage. That's where the detail will come, and the community infrastructure levy amounts and the section 106 amounts. And I know traffic has cropped up quite a bit this evening. I'd just like to say that within that report, there is often a reference to a memorandum of understanding between the Borough Council, the County Council and Highways England for the provision of an infrastructure package for the A52 and the A606 Melton Road, consisting of improvements to 5 junctions to support the housing growth, and developer financial contributions will be sought through the section 106 and the SIL. So there is a lot of financial contributions coming to help the traffic within the borough to accommodate these proposed developments. I would just like to raise that the issues about climate change and housing standards, we are lobbying government. We will continue to do that. we're not content with the minimum standard of the building regulations in this area on a number of issues, not just the climate change, about access for the people with disabilities and the like. We are working on it, but in particular, I just want to emphasise again, there is a working group looking at and hopefully bringing a report back early next year to this council about changes, what we would like to have as a higher standard than the national building regulations. And as the leader said, we hope to showcase that in our Abbey Road eco-development of housing, because I think if we can lead by example and show developers what can be done,
Yes.
and people like what we do, then I think that's a very good opportunity to show the way forward on that. And as you know from recent debates, we are on board with the climate carbon agenda and the like. I'm not going to go into the details of what various councillors have said about their particular wards. I just touch on the green belt and what that's all about. I mean, fundamentally, it is a big issue, but the National Planning Policy Framework states that when you're defining green belt boundaries, and this is a big issue, they should be able to be clearly defined using a physical feature that most people can readily recognise and identify with, and they're likely to be permanent. Am I coming up to time?
Yes.
As I say, there's a lot of detail. I think that's what we've done, and I think the inspector recognises that. So I would hope we can all vote for it. Thank you very much.
Well, can I thank you, and can I thank everybody who's taken part in this? I think you've all had an opportunity to say what you think, and I'm most grateful that it has gone so well. Now, we have been asked to have a recorded vote, so I propose that we go ahead with that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll read all councillors' names out, and if you can indicate for me if you're voting for, against or abstaining, please. Councillor Adair. For. Councillor Bailey. For. Councillor Bansal. For. Councillor Begum. For. Councillor Butler. For. Councillor Clark. For. Councillor Cumberlack. Councillor Cotty, Councillor Dickman, Councillor Eddyveen, Councillor Gaunt, Councillor Gowland, Councillor Gray, Councillor Healy, Councillor Hetherington, Councillor Howitt, Councillor Inglis, Councillor Jeffries,
Abstain.
Councillor Brennan, Councillor Jones. For. Councillor Major. For. Councillor Malinder. For. Councillor Sue Malinder.
Abstain.
Councillor Mason.
For.
Councillor Moore.
For.
Councillor Phillips. For. Councillor Purdue Horan.
For.
Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor Shaw. For. Councillor Sims.
For.
Councillor John Stockwood.
For.
Councillor Maureen Stockwood. For. Councillor Thomas. For. Councillor Upton.
For.
Councillor Verdi.
For.
Councillor Rex Walker.
For.
Councillor Jen Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Way. Councillor Douglas Wheeler. Councillor Jonathan Wheeler.
Just got a destination right. Sorry, but he's got a problem with work.
That's fine. Councillor Williams. Thank you.
The result of the recorded vote is that there were 2 abstentions, 2 against, and 36 for. And that concludes the business of the evening. Can I thank you all for attending? Can I thank all of you who took part? I think the whole thing went extremely well. We had extremely interesting and pertinent points brought forward, which leaves us quite a lot to think about. But thank you for attending, and may I hope that you all have a very safe journey home. Thank you very much.